Welcome to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective and creator of the Build Your Reiki Business program, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Greetings, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. It's Christian, so honored to have you here, so thank you so very much for joining me. In this episode, we're talking about Reiki Research. We're going to talk about some recent research studies, break them down, have a discussion about Reiki Research. But first, have you heard, I hope you have heard, that the Reiki Business Roundtable meets each month for Reiki conversations and connections. And no matter where you are on your Reiki business journey, you're invited to join us. There's a seat for you at the roundtable. standingstoneshealing.com/roundtable to learn more and save your seat. In a recent episode of the podcast, I talked about dealing with Reiki skeptics. And one way that we can deal with Reiki skeptics is to offer research on the benefits of Reiki in order to take a more scientific approach for those who need that kind of information in order to understand and validate Reiki. But research isn't important for us to know about just for our Reiki skeptic conversations. Indeed, it's really important for all of us as Reiki practitioners to know some of the research because we may very well indeed get questions about it, and it's helpful to be ready with information. And it's also just interesting for us as Reiki practitioners to know and helpful for us to know because these studies do indeed help to inform our Reiki journey and our experience of Reiki, or at least I think they can help to enrich our Reiki journey. And so I went to PubMed. If you Google PubMed, the website will come right up and you're able to do a search for studies in PubMed. So these are published research studies, published scientific medical studies. It's from the National Library of Medicine. And what we can see on PubMed is that there is an increased number of Reiki studies. And indeed, I think it's safe to say that we will see more and more Reiki studies in the coming years, especially because it can and does take time for research studies to be published, which means that many of the studies being published now, the research was actually done in years prior. And so the research going on right now will be published in the years ahead. Now, PubMed is not the only place to go for Reiki research, but it is a reputable place to go for research findings. And of course, Reiki research is being conducted in all kinds of ways, not just in the medical ways that are featured on PubMed, but also psychological research is being done as well. But in this episode, we're going to focus in on some studies from PubMed. And the first study we're going to talk about from 2022 is on what is called, quote, sham Reiki. Now, in this kind of research trial, the researchers will take a group of sham Reiki practitioners. And this is just the word that they use, sham, not real, fake practitioners who are not Reiki practitioners. And they offer Reiki to the subjects as one group. Another group is that the subjects receive actual real Reiki from real Reiki practitioners. So in studies where there is, quote, sham Reiki as a comparison, what happens is the fake practitioner waves their hands around the subject as though they are a Reiki practitioner, but they're not trained. They are not Reiki practitioners. And so these are sham Reiki practitioners. And in this particular study from 2022, they took a group of people who were undergoing a gastrointestinal endoscopy, you know, where they stick the tube down your throat. Ow. They had a group of sham Reiki practitioners perform sham Reiki. With one group, they had a group of others who were going to undergo this surgery who received Reiki from actual Reiki practitioners. And then, of course, any good research study has a control group or a group that nothing happens to them. And what they found was that patients who received Reiki before their procedure had a reduction in their stress and anxiety levels, and an increase in their comfort levels. Now, one thing that makes reading these studies a little challenging for the layperson is that they can be very heavy on the medical terminology. You know, things like gastrointestinal endoscopy, not everybody knows what that is. And so we might look at these studies and scratch our heads and say, is Reiki good or not? Or is Reiki beneficial or not? What's the outcome here? That's just what I want to know about. And we aren't maybe so interested in the very specific ways in which the study was conducted. But when it comes to research, it's important to have that specificity so that we, number one, understand exactly who the study was done on and how, and that we can replicate the study exactly as it was done. And so we might say, in looking at our next research trial on patients with epilepsy, well, why are they only focusing on people with epilepsy? Because probably the researchers were able to convince the doctor to let them do this Reiki trial along with their treatment of their patient. But in this epilepsy study of the effects of Reiki on sleep and quality of life in patients with epilepsy from 2024, they found that patients in the Reiki group had higher sleep quality, longer sleep, fewer sleep disturbances, and felt better during the day than the patients who did not receive Reiki. Now, with this study, I have some real questions, and I have real questions with a lot of the studies, because when the study in the abstract talks about the results, it says, after the Reiki application. And my question is, what was the application? What did that look like? We know as Reiki practitioners that Reiki can be offered in all kinds of ways. It depends upon things like our lineage, our training, the own particular personal way that we practice. And so not all Reiki practitioners offer Reiki in the same way. And any good research study is going to do things exactly the same way to ensure consistency. And so I don't know, was this all one Reiki practitioner giving 30 sessions to the 30 people in the intervention Reiki group? Was this 30 practitioners giving one session each to each person? We don't know. And if that's the case, if it wasn't all one person, then we know that there were probably differences with each session. And so for me, this is a challenge with Reiki research. Now, of course, I'm a proponent of Reiki research. I encourage Reiki research. We need more Reiki research. And I think that it can be challenging to conduct Reiki research trials that are consistent simply because every practitioner does it a little differently. Of course, we also know there are different types of Reiki. And so when we see a phrase like, quote, Reiki application, is that Usui Reiki only? Does that include any kind of Reiki? What kind of Reiki is being practiced and how in these research studies? I don't know if the researchers take these questions into consideration, but we know as practitioners that these are important questions and they may very well impact the results of the studies. But good news is we have a study showing that yes, indeed, Reiki helps with sleep and quality of life with epilepsy. Now, of course, we're not surprised by things like that. And it's very helpful to have data and studies that back up all of the anecdotal evidence that we have from our own personal lives and the lives of our clients and students. We know the stories. We know the impact that Reiki has had on our lives and on the lives of our clients and students. And in addition to those powerful stories, it's also very helpful and important for us to have scientific studies of the results of Reiki. Now, in this study, also published in 2024, The Power of Reiki, its effects on pain and biochemical parameters in patients undergoing bone marrow transplantation. We find that the group that received Reiki showed a significant improvement in pain reduction. And so the Reiki group had less pain with their bone marrow transplant than the non-Reiki group. They also had better biochemical parameters, meaning that things like their blood work was better. As a matter of fact, in this study, it was about the immune system response. And so the conclusion from this study is that Reiki is effective for pain control and enhancing the immune system response. Now, of course, again, we're not surprised by that. But I will say I'm actually not a fan of the wording of this conclusion because it's so general. And so my question is, can you take this very small, limited study that was done on 21 people in the Reiki group, 21 people in the control group did not receive Reiki, specifically for bone marrow transplant, and extrapolate and generalize that to the point where you say Reiki is effective for pain control and enhancing the immune system response? Yes, indeed, maybe, but I don't know that that's really a fair generalization to make from such a very specific study. And so I think it's important for us to take a critical eye to the research. While, of course, we want Reiki research, while, of course, we believe in the power of Reiki, I think it's also important for us as Reiki practitioners to Interrogate and question the research, because I don't know about you, but I want good research. And I don't know about you, but I don't want sham research. Now, of course, I'm not saying that these studies that I'm sharing with you are sham research. I'm simply saying that I think you can agree that if there's going to be scientific Reiki research, we want it to be valid. We want it to be authentic, and we want it to be something that we can share with the larger community to help them understand the benefits and the power of Reiki. Now, another element that is challenging in the Reiki research is this idea of measuring distance sessions. And I say this because there are so many ways to offer distance Reiki. Now, of course, I am all for researching the power, the effects of distance Reiki. And I think any research on distance Reiki brings up a lot of questions. So in this study, the effect of distant Reiki sessions on holistic well-being, this one is also from 2022. The participants attended 20-minute distant Reiki sessions for 4 consecutive days. Now, we know that's going to be helpful, right? But we don't know what kind of distant sessions these were. Were they live? Were they scheduled? Was the patient just told, you will be receiving distance Reiki for 4 consecutive days? Was it at a specific time? We don't know. The conclusion is that subjects scored higher on the holistic well-being scale than those who did not receive Reiki, distance Reiki, but we don't know exactly how that was administered. So, as the abstract states, the distance Reiki sessions improve participants' holistic well-being. They help them develop a positive mood, help them to experience less sadness and greater levels of awareness, but we don't know exactly how that distance session was done, at least not from the abstract. One more challenge I think that exists with Reiki research and research in general is that when you take a look at the articles on PubMed or from other reputable sources, you're going to find a lot of familiar names. And so there are certain researchers that are conducting multiple Reiki studies. Of course, this is very common, very normal in research, where you have a researcher who devotes years and years to researching one very specific thing. So it's not out of the ordinary. It's actually pretty normal to see a lot of the same names come up on the more recent Reiki studies. But this is a challenge because, of course, each of us have our own biases, our own opinions, our own beliefs, and I wouldn't be surprised if these researchers conducting multiple studies on Reiki kind of like Reiki. I would not be surprised if they are rooting for Reiki in these studies, which indeed can skew the study results. Now, again, this is not confined to Reiki. This is very common in research, but I think it's important for us in considering the research on Reiki to consider the questions and to interrogate the studies themselves, even while we push for more studies and want more studies. And even while we want, let's admit, we want those studies to show the benefits of Reiki and to help promote Reiki as an effective intervention. So, from recent research, we know that Reiki, at least in these very specific studies, is good for pain. It's good for mental and emotional well-being. It's good for sleep. It's good for our immune system. But let's be honest, we didn't need any studies to tell us that. So, what do you think of Reiki Research? What are your thoughts about Reiki Research? What are some studies that you have heard about Reiki? Join us in the Reiki Business Collective Facebook group and tell us all about it at facebook.com/groups/Reiki Biz. Sending lots of blessings and best wishes to the Reiki Research and to your Reiki business. Thanks for tuning in to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and send to a friend. Learn more about the Build Your Reiki Business program at standingstoneshealing.com/build. Sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.